I did not stand up to object. I simply glanced at my watch like I was timing a train. My sister's lawyer roared that I was a parasite. I nodded slightly, as if agreeing, then said exactly one sentence. "Not yet. I am waiting for the gatekeeper." When the heavy wooden doors swung open, the temperature in the room shifted instantly from heated family drama to the absolute zero of financial frost. My name is Grace Donovan. The air conditioning in the Cedar County Probate Court was humming with a sound that reminded me of a failing hard drive. It was a low, mechanical drone that did nothing to lower the temperature of the room, but managed to make everything feel sterile, artificial, cold. I sat alone at the defendant's table. To my right, the wood was scarred with the scratches of 1,000 pens from 1,000 other people who had sat here and watched their lives get dismantled. I ran my thumb over a deep gouge in the mahogany. It felt rough, real. Unlike the performance happening 5 feet away from me, my sister, Tessa, was weeping. It was a good performance. She was wearing a black dress that was modest enough for church, but fitted enough to remind everyone she was young and vulnerable. She had a tissue clutched in her left hand, and she dabbed at her eyes with the rhythmic precision of a metronome. Dab, sniff, dab, sniff. Her lawyer, a man named Mr. Sterling, was pacing in front of the bench. Sterling was the kind of attorney you hired when you wanted to scorch the earth. He wore a navy suit that cost more than my car, and he smelled of expensive cologne and aggression. "Your Honor," Sterling boomed, his voice filling the high-ceilinged room. "We are not just talking about mismanagement here. We are talking about predation, calculated, cold-blooded predation." He spun around to point a finger at me. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I just looked at his manicured fingernail. "Grace Donovan moved into the deceased's home 6 months ago," Sterling continued, turning back to Judge Holloway. "She cut the phone lines. She changed the locks. She screened the mail. She created a fortress of solitude around a vulnerable, dying man for one purpose and one purpose only." Sterling paused for dramatic effect. He looked at the gallery behind me, then back to the judge. "To drain him dry. She is a leech, Your Honor, a parasite who attached herself to the host and waited for the heart to stop beating so she could gorge herself on the remains." I heard a gasp from the row behind me. It was my mother, Renee. It was a theatrical gasp, perfectly timed to punctuate the lawyer's sentence. I did not turn around. I knew exactly what I would see if I did. Renee would be clutching my father's arm, her face a mask of tragic betrayal. My father, Gordon, would be sitting there with his jaw set tight, staring at the back of my head with that familiar mix of disappointment and greed. They were sitting on Tessa's side of the aisle. Of course they were. Tessa was the golden child. Tessa was the investment that was supposed to pay off. I was just the insurance policy they had tried to cash in too many times. "We are asking for an emergency temporary conservatorship over the estate," Sterling said, lowering his voice to a grave, serious register. "We believe the assets are in imminent danger of dissipation. Ms. Donovan has access to the accounts. If the court does not intervene right now, this morning, there will be nothing left by the end of the week. We need to freeze everything. We need to remove her from the property immediately." Judge Holloway looked tired. He was a man in his 60s with deep bags under his eyes and a hairline that had retreated in surrender years ago. He had seen this play out 100 times. Siblings fighting over a house that needed a new roof. Parents fighting over custody of a savings account. It was all noise to him. He looked over his glasses at me. "Ms. Donovan," the judge said. His voice was dry, like sandpaper. "You do not have counsel present." I stood up. I smoothed the front of my gray skirt. I kept my hands clasped in front of me. "No, Your Honor, I am representing myself today." "That is rarely a wise choice in a probate matter of this size," Judge Holloway said. "Mr. Sterling has made some very serious allegations. He is claiming you exercised undue influence. He is claiming you isolated the decedent. He is asking for an immediate freeze of all assets and your removal from the residence. Do you understand the gravity of this motion? I do, Your Honor. Do you wish to request a continuance to hire an attorney? No, Your Honor, Sterling smirked. He thought I was broke. He thought I was arrogant. He thought he was about to bulldoze me into the asphalt of the courthouse parking lot. Then do you have a response to the motion for emergency conservatorship? The judge asked. I looked down at my wrist. It was a simple analog watch with a leather strap. The second hand was sweeping past the 9. It was 9:59 in the morning. I looked up at the judge. My face was a blank sheet of paper. Not yet, I said softly. The judge frowned. Excuse me. I do not have a response yet, I clarified. I am waiting for the trustee. Sterling laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh. Trustee, Your Honor, there is no trust. The deceased died intestate. That is why we are here. Ms. Donovan is stalling. She is trying to buy time to transfer funds. I am not stalling, I said, my voice remaining level. I did not look at Sterling. I looked at the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom. And I am not checking the time because I am nervous. Mr. Sterling, I am checking the time because he is punctual. Who is punctual? The judge asked, his patience thinning. The gatekeeper, I said, as the second hand hit the 12. The double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The air in the room seemed to shift instantly. If it had been cold before, it was now freezing. A man walked in. He was not a lawyer. You could tell by the way he walked. Lawyers walked like they owned the room. This man walked like he had built the room and could condemn it whenever he felt like it. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out a suit that was clearly off the rack. It was a charcoal gray, nondescript, functional. He carried a leather briefcase that was scuffed at the corners, the handle worn dark from years of grip. He didn't have the shiny shoes of a litigator. He didn't have the eager-to-please smile of a salesman. He had the dead, flat eyes of a shark that ate numbers. He walked down the center aisle, his footsteps heavy and deliberate on the parquet floor. Click, clack, click, clack. Sterling stopped smiling. He turned to look at the newcomer. My parents shifted in their seats. Tessa stopped her rhythmic dabbing and stared. The man walked past the wooden railing that separated the public from the proceedings. He didn't ask for permission. He simply walked to the empty table next to mine, placed his briefcase down, and snapped the latches open. The sound echoed in the silent room like 2 gunshots. He pulled out a thick manila envelope. It was sealed with red wax, not a sticker that looked like wax, but actual wax. He turned to the judge. Good morning, Your Honor, the man said. His voice was deep, gravelly, and completely devoid of emotion. My name is Arthur Penda. Judge Holloway sat up straighter. Mr. Penda, I don't see your name on the docket. I am not a party to the dispute, Your Honor, Penda said. He walked up to the bench and placed the sealed envelope on the judge's desk. I am the representative for Hearthstone Fiduciary and Trust. The silence that followed that sentence was heavy. It had mass. Hearthstone. I saw the color drain out of Sterling's face. He knew the name. Any lawyer who worked in high-end estates knew the name. Hearthstone didn't handle family squabbles. They didn't handle credit card debt. They handled dynasties. They were the financial equivalent of a nuclear bunker. They were cold. They were impossible to breach. And they did not negotiate with terrorists. Hearthstone, Sterling stammered. Your Honor, we have no record of any trust. The decedent's assets are personal property. Arthur Penda didn't even look at Sterling. He spoke only to the judge. The envelope contains the certified copy of the irrevocable trust established by the decedent 3 years ago. It also contains the assignment of assets. The house, the accounts, the portfolio, and the intellectual property rights were all transferred into the trust 36 months ago. Penda turned slowly to face the room. His eyes swept over Sterling, then over Tessa, and finally landed on my parents in the back row. There is no estate for this court to probate, Penda said. There are no personal assets for the plaintiff to seize. Everything belongs to the trust. Tessa stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. That's a lie, she screamed. forgetting her role as the grieving daughter. He didn't have a trust. He was senile. Grace made him do it. She tricked him. Penda looked at Tessa. He didn't look angry. He looked like an exterminator looking at a termite. "Ms. Donovan," Penda said to my sister, his voice cutting through her hysteria, "I would advise you to sit down. The trust documents are ironclad, and more importantly, the administration of these assets is not a family matter. It is a corporate matter. I am the trustee. I am the sole legal owner of everything you are currently trying to claim." Sterling was wiping sweat from his forehead. He leaned over to Tessa and whispered frantically, trying to pull her back down to her chair. He knew what was happening. He knew that fighting a bank trustee was not like fighting a sister. A bank didn't care if you cried. A bank didn't care about your childhood trauma. A bank had a legal department that worked 24 hours a day. Judge Holloway opened the envelope. He slid on his reading glasses and scanned the first page. He flipped to the second, then the third. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, not looking up. "This document appears to be in order. It is notarized, witnessed, and filed. It explicitly names Hearthstone as the sole trustee." "But, Your Honor," Sterling protested, though his voice lacked its earlier fire, "we contest the validity. My client believes the decedent was coerced." "You can file a separate motion to contest the validity of the instrument," the judge said, closing the file. "But as of right now, the property does not belong to the heirs. It belongs to the trust. Therefore, your motion for emergency conservatorship over the estate is moot. There is no estate to conserve." I watched Tessa. She looked like she had been slapped. Her mouth was open, her face blotchy. She looked at our parents for help, but Gordon and Renee were frozen. They were staring at Arthur Penda with a mixture of fear and confusion. They had come here expecting a family drama where they could guilt-trip me into submission. Instead, they had walked into a corporate boardroom. I finally turned my head to look directly at my sister. She was trembling. She wasn't acting anymore. This was real fear. The fear of a plan disintegrating in real time. The fear of debt collectors who were waiting for a payout that just vanished. I caught her eye. I didn't smile. I didn't smirk. I just stared at her with the same flat expression I had worn all morning. "You didn't read the room," my eyes said to her. "And more importantly, you just signed a declaration of war against a fortress." Arthur Penda walked back to his table and sat down. He opened his briefcase again and pulled out a single, thin file. He placed it on the table, perfectly aligned with the edge. "Your Honor," Penda said, "if the plaintiff intends to pursue a challenge to the validity of the trust, Hearthstone is prepared to defend the instrument. However, I am obligated to inform the court and the plaintiff of the specific clauses contained within Article 9 of the document." Sterling looked like he wanted to vomit. "Article 9. The no contest clause," Penda said. The room went dead silent. I leaned back in my chair. The show was over. The trial had begun. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one on defense. I looked at my watch again. 10:05, right on schedule. Judge Holloway adjusted his spectacles, the wire frames catching the harsh fluorescent light of the courtroom. He did not look at the people in the room. He looked only at the document that Arthur Penda had placed on his bench. The silence in the room was no longer the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hanging at the very top of its arc. The judge cleared his throat. The sound was dry, like a boot stepping on autumn leaves. "Counsel," Judge Holloway said, addressing Tessa's lawyer, "have you seen this document?" "I have not, Your Honor," Sterling said. His voice was tight. The bluster was gone. He was a man realizing he had brought a knife to a drone strike. "It is an irrevocable trust," the judge read aloud, his voice devoid of inflection. "Dated October 14th, 2023, the grantor, the late Mr. Donovan, transferred all real property, including the primary residence at 412 Oak Street, and all liquid assets held in the Cedar County Credit Union, into the ownership of the Hearthstone Trust." The judge looked up. "Mr. Sterling, Your client is petitioning for control of an estate that effectively does not exist. The decedent did not own these assets when he died. The trust did. The words hung in the air. Irrevocable. It was a terrifying word if you were on the wrong side of it. It meant it could not be changed. It could not be taken back. It meant that for the last 3 years, while Tessa had been planning how to renovate the kitchen, and my father had been calculating how much the vintage car collection would fetch at auction, they had been fantasizing about spending money that already belonged to a corporation. Tessa let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She stood up again, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned the color of bone. "That is impossible," she said. Her voice was shaking, but not with grief. It was shaking with the erratic frequency of panic. "He would never do that. He loved that house. He wanted me to have that house. He told me—" She spun around and pointed a trembling finger at me. "She did this," Tessa hissed. "She made him sign it. He was sick. He was on medication. He didn't know what day it was half the time." Sterling tried to grab her arm, but she shook him off. "He was not lucid," Tessa shouted at the judge. "My father was mentally compromised. Grace controlled his medication. She controlled his food. She probably withheld his painkillers until he signed whatever she put in front of him. I want this trust invalidated. I want a competency hearing." The accusation hung there, ugly and raw. It was the nuclear option. She was accusing me of elder abuse. She was accusing me of coercion. I sat perfectly still. I did not defend myself. I did not look at the judge with wide, innocent eyes. I simply looked at Arthur Penda. The trustee stood up slowly. He did not look at Tessa. He treated her outburst as background noise, irrelevant static in a clear signal. "Your Honor," Penda said, his voice flat, "if the plaintiff is formally accusing the grantor of mental incapacity, I must direct the court's attention to Article 9, Section 3 of the trust instrument." Sterling froze. He knew what was coming. I could see the realization hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. He reached out and physically clamped his hand over Tessa's forearm, squeezing hard enough to make her wince. "Sit down," Sterling hissed at her. "Tessa, sit down, now." "Why?" she demanded, though her voice wavered as she saw the look on his face. "Because of the clause," Sterling whispered, though in the quiet room, everyone heard it. Penda continued as if there had been no interruption. "The no contest clause, also known as the in terrorem clause, it states that if any beneficiary challenges the validity of the trust, or the capacity of the grantor, or seeks to invalidate any provision of the instrument in a court of law, that beneficiary shall be treated as if they had predeceased the grantor. They forfeit all right, title, and interest in any distribution they might have otherwise received." The room temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. An in terrorem clause, Latin for in fear, it was a weapon designed to stop exactly what Tessa was doing. It was a booby trap, if you reached for the jar. The lid snapped shut and cut off your hand. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, looking over his glasses, "your client has just made a verbal declaration on the record that the grantor was incompetent. Are you moving to formally contest the validity of the trust based on lack of capacity?" Sterling was sweating. I could see a bead of perspiration run down his temple and disappear into his expensive collar. If he said yes, and he lost, Tessa got 0. If he said no, he had to accept the trust, which meant Grace, or rather, the trustee, controlled everything. "Your Honor," Sterling stammered, "we would like to request a brief recess. We need to review the document." "The document has been filed," Penda said. "The clause is active." "We move to withdraw the emergency petition," Sterling said quickly. "We withdraw the allegations of imminent danger." Judge Holloway leaned back. He did not look impressed. "Mr. Sterling, you came into my courtroom this morning and accused Ms. Donovan of holding a dying man hostage. You put that on the record. You do not get to ring a bell and then unring it just because you found out the bank account is locked." "We are simply asking to regroup, Your Honor," Sterling pleaded. "The petition is already entered," the judge said coldly. The allegations are on the transcript. I turned slightly in my chair to look at the row behind me. My father, Gordon, was staring at the back of the trustee's head. His face was a study in shock. For 40 years, Gordon Donovan had run his family like a petty dictator. He ruled by noise. He ruled by intimidation. If he yelled loud enough, he got his way. If he threatened to cut you off, you fell in line. But this was different. He was looking at a contract. You cannot yell at a contract. You cannot intimidate a fiduciary obligation. For the first time in my life, I saw my father look at me not with disdain, but with a dawning, horrific comprehension. He realized he had absolutely no leverage. He looked at me, and he saw a stranger. He saw a wall he could not climb. My mother was gripping her purse, her eyes darting between Tessa and the judge. She wanted to cry, but she didn't know if crying would help or hurt. She was waiting for a cue that was not coming. Tessa slumped in her chair. The fight had drained out of her the moment Sterling explained the clause. She realized she had just gambled her entire inheritance on a bluff, and the house had called. She leaned toward me. We were separated by 3 feet of empty air, but it felt like a canyon. "You knew," she whispered. Her voice was venomous, a low hiss, meant only for me. "You let me hire a lawyer. You let me file this. You knew about the clause." I turned my head slowly. I looked her in the eye. "I did not make you file anything, Tessa," I said quietly. "I did not make you hire Mr. Sterling. I did not make you come here today and call me a leech. You could have told me," she hissed. Tears of rage were welling up in her eyes. "You could have told me there was a trust you set me up." "I set nothing up," I replied. "I waited." She looked at me with pure hatred. "You are a monster." I turned back to the front. I did not care what she called me. I had been called worse by better people. I had been called a disappointment by my father since I was 12. I had been called cold by my mother since I was 16. Monster was just a word. The trust was a legal reality. I did not need to win this argument. I did not need to scream back at her. I just needed to let them talk. Every word they said was another nail in the coffin they were building for themselves. Judge Holloway looked at the trustee. "Mr. Penda, does the trust provide for the family members present?" "It does, Your Honor," Penda said. "There are specific bequests. However, those bequests are contingent upon the no contest provision. If the beneficiary triggers the clause, the assets destined for them are returned to the principal and distributed to the residual beneficiary." "And who is the residual beneficiary?" the judge asked. Penda paused. "That is confidential, Your Honor, unless the clause is triggered, but I can confirm that Ms. Tessa Donovan is a named beneficiary of a specific cash gift, a gift she is currently in danger of forfeiting." Tessa gasped. The money was real. It was there, and she was standing on the edge of the cliff, holding a sledgehammer. Sterling stood up, trying to salvage the wreckage. "Your Honor, my client was emotional. She spoke out of grief. We are not formally contesting the capacity of the grantor at this time. We are merely seeking clarification." "Clarification," the judge repeated, his tone skeptical. "Yes, we have concerns about the circumstances of the last 6 months," Sterling said, trying to pivot back to the emotional narrative. "Even if there is a trust, the isolation of the decedent is a separate issue. If he was isolated, if he was cut off from his family, that speaks to undue influence in the execution of his daily affairs, if not the trust itself." It was a weak pivot, but it was all they had. They were trying to bypass the trust by attacking my behavior. They wanted to prove I was an abuser so they could perhaps attack the trust from a moral standpoint later, or at least drag my name through the mud enough to force a settlement. "He was isolated," my mother cried out from the back, unable to stop herself. "She wouldn't let us see him. We drove over there on Christmas Eve and the lights were off. She kept him in the dark." Judge Holloway banged his gavel. "Order, madam. You will remain silent, or you will be removed." My mother shrank back, sobbing into a handkerchief. It was a good sob. It sounded heartbroken. To anyone in the room, it sounded like a mother grieving her lost chance to say goodbye. But I remembered Christmas Eve. I remembered exactly what had happened. Arthur Penda did not turn around. He opened his briefcase again. "Your Honor," Penda said, "if the opposing counsel intends to pursue the narrative of isolation and improper conduct by Ms. Donovan as a way to circumvent the trust's validity, I must ask the court's permission to submit additional evidence." "What evidence?" Sterling asked warily. "The plaintiff claims Ms. Donovan cut off communication," Penda said. "They claim they were desperate to see the decedent. They claim they were turned away at the door." Penda pulled out a second envelope. This one was not sealed with wax. It was a standard manila folder, but it was thick. "The decedent was aware of his family's potential narrative," Penda said. "He was a meticulous man. He kept records." Sterling looked at the folder like it was a bomb. "Records. If the court allows," Penda said, "I would like to enter into evidence the communication logs provided by the telecommunications provider, as well as the decedent's personal handwritten logs regarding visitation attempts." I looked at Tessa. She had gone pale. She stopped whispering. She stopped crying. She knew what phone calls she had made. And more importantly, she knew what phone calls she had not made. The narrative of the loving, excluded family was about to collide with the hard data of call logs. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, "do you wish to proceed with the accusation of isolation? Because if you do, I am going to allow this evidence. And once it is in, it is in." Sterling looked at Tessa. Tessa looked at the floor. Sterling hesitated. He was trapped. If he stopped now. They walked away with nothing but the hope of the bequest. If he pushed, and the evidence proved they were lying, they might lose everything under the clause and face perjury charges. But greed is a powerful drug, and Tessa was an addict. "We proceed," Tessa whispered to her lawyer. "Those logs won't show anything. She blocked our numbers. That's our argument. She blocked us." Sterling nodded. He straightened his jacket. "We proceed, Your Honor. We believe the logs will show a pattern of alienation initiated by the defendant." I looked down at my watch. 10:15. They had taken the bait. They had walked right past the warning sign and stepped onto the trap door. Penda nodded once, almost imperceptibly. He handed the folder to the bailiff. "Very well," Penda said. "Let us look at the record." The courtroom was silent again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of ice. It was the silence of a storm holding its breath right before the lightning strikes. As the bailiff collected the folder of phone logs, the silence in the courtroom stretched thin. It gave me time to think. It gave me time to remember why I was sitting here, calm as a statue. While my family disintegrated 3 rows behind me, it was the word Sterling had used. Leech. That word was not new to me. It was a ghost that had haunted the hallways of my childhood home for 20 years. It was the foundation upon which my entire identity had been constructed by Gordon and Renee Donovan. My mind drifted back to the kitchen table of our old house in the suburbs. I was 14 years old. The laminate on the table was peeling at the corner. A detail I focused on because I could not bear to look at my father's face. There was a piece of paper in the center of the table. It was a hospital bill. 3 weeks earlier, my appendix had burst. It was a routine emergency, the kind of thing that happens to thousands of teenagers every year. I had been rushed to the emergency room, operated on, and sent home with a scar and a prescription for painkillers. I thought I had survived. But then the bill came. My father, Gordon, sat across from me. He was smoking a cigarette, the smoke curling up toward the yellowing ceiling. He tapped the paper with a callous finger. "Do you see this number, Grace?" he asked. His voice was not angry. It was heavy with a theatrical despair that I would come to recognize as his primary weapon. $8,000. That is the deductible. That is the anesthesia. That is the room fee. I shrank into my chair. "I'm sorry, Dad." "Sorry doesn't put money in the bank," he said. He took a long drag. "I was going to expand the inventory at the store this month. I had a plan. I was going to buy that new shipment of lumber. We were going to finally turn a corner. He blew the smoke directly at the bill. "But now," he whispered, "we have to pay for your stomach ache." That was the birth of the family myth. The story went that Gordon Donovan was a brilliant businessman, a titan of industry who was only held back by the disastrous financial burden of his eldest daughter. The reality, which I only learned years later when I learned to read a balance sheet, was that his hardware store had been bleeding money for 5 years. He had over-leveraged his credit. He had made bad bets on inventory that nobody wanted. He was drowning in debt long before my appendix decided to rupture. But he needed a reason. He needed a villain. And I was right there. For the next 10 years, every time the lights were turned off because the bill wasn't paid, it was my fault. Every time we couldn't go on vacation, it was because of Grace's medical disaster. I carried that debt like a physical weight. I grew up believing I owed them my life, quite literally. So I paid. I paid by making myself small. I paid by not asking for new clothes. I paid by getting a job at a diner when I was 15 and handing the cash envelope to my mother every Friday. Renee would take it with a sigh, wiping a tear from her cheek as if my $300 was a charitable donation to a hopeless cause. "We are just so behind, Grace," she would say, tucking the money into her purse. "But we love you anyway." Then came Tessa. Tessa was born 7 years after me. By the time she was a teenager, the hardware store had finally gone under, and my father had stumbled into a lucky consulting gig that paid actual money. But the narrative didn't change. I was still the mistake. Tessa was the phoenix. Tessa was the rebirth. I watched from the sidelines as Tessa got the braces I never got. I watched as she got private dance lessons, cheerleading camp, and a brand new sedan when she turned 16. "It is an investment," my father told me when I asked why I was paying my own college tuition while Tessa was getting a living allowance. "Tessa has potential. She needs to be positioned correctly. You understand. Grace, you are the practical one. You are the survivor." I was the survivor. Tessa was the star. I moved out the day I turned 18. But the dynamic followed me. I became their personal ATM. If the water heater broke, they called Grace. If Tessa needed a deposit for her sorority house, they called Grace. And I paid. I paid because I still believed the lie. I believed I was the reason they were broken. It wasn't until I met Xavier that the fog began to lift. Xavier Hollis was a structural engineer. He looked at the world in terms of load-bearing walls and stress points. He didn't understand drama. He only understood physics. We were sitting in our small apartment, 3 years into our marriage. I was writing a check to my father for $2,000 because he had claimed the IRS was auditing him and he needed a bridge loan. Xavier put his hand over mine. He didn't take the pen away. He just stopped it from moving. "Grace," he said, "show me the letter." "What letter?" I asked. "The audit letter. The IRS sends a letter. If he is being audited, he has a letter. Show it to me." "He didn't show me the letter," I said defensively. "He just told me. He's my dad. Xavier, he wouldn't lie about the IRS." Xavier looked at me with those calm, brown eyes. "Do you know what your father's credit score is?" "No." "I do," Xavier said, "because I looked it up when we co-signed that lease for Tessa last year. It is 450. Grace, people with a 450 credit score do not get audited for hidden millions. They get chased by collection agencies for credit cards they maxed out at the casino." He pulled the checkbook away from me gently. "Honey," he said, "are you sure they are victims, or are they architects?" That question cracked the foundation. I started looking. I really looked. I took my skills from my job and applied them to my family. I worked for the Graywell Risk Bureau. It was a boutique firm that handled crisis management for high-net-worth individuals. We didn't do PR. We did cleanup. When a CEO panicked, we stepped in. My job was to read contracts, assess liabilities, and predict human behavior under pressure. I learned that people lie when they are afraid, but they lie even more when they are greedy. I pulled my parents' public records. I saw the liens, I saw the judgments, and I saw the dates. The medical debt from my surgery had been written off by the hospital as charity care because my father was unemployed at the time. He never paid a dime of it. The investment in Tessa's future was funded by taking out credit cards in my grandfather's name. I realized then that I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a resource. I was a host organism. And the moment I stopped providing, I became a threat. That was when I turned to my grandfather. The man who had died 6 months ago, the man whose trust was currently dismantling my sister's life, was not my father. He was my grandfather, Silas Donovan. He was my father's father. Silas had been the original source of the money. He was a hard man, a cold man in his own way. But he was honest. He had watched Gordon squander opportunity after opportunity. He had watched Renee manipulate everyone around her, and he had watched me silently clean up the messes. 6 months ago, Silas called me. He didn't call Gordon. He didn't call Tessa. He called me. "I am dying. Grace," he had said over the phone. His voice was rasping, but clear. "And the vultures are circling. I can hear their wings." I went to him. I moved into his house, not to control him, but to shield him. I saw the way Gordon looked at the antique furniture, calculating its pawn value. I saw the way Tessa asked about the jewelry, her eyes hungry. A Tuesday morning, 3 months before he died. Silas asked me to drive him somewhere. "Where are we going?" I asked as I helped him into the passenger seat of my old Volvo. "To the lawyers," he said. "I am done being a buffet for your father." I drove him. I sat in the waiting room while he met with Arthur Penda. I did not ask what was in the documents. I did not ask for a share. I did not ask for a penny. I just wanted him to have peace. When he came out, he looked lighter. He looked like a man who had finally put down a heavy load. "It is done," he told me as we walked back to the car. "I have built a wall. Grace, a wall they cannot climb." He patted my hand. "They will blame you," he whispered. "When they find out, they will say you made me do it. They will say you stole it." "I know," I said. "Are you ready for that?" he asked. I thought about the hospital bill. I thought about the years of being called a leech. I thought about the way Tessa looked at me like I was the help. I have been the villain in their story since I was 14. "Grandpa," I said, "I might as well get paid for the role." He laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound. "Good, because I left the key with the gatekeeper, and when they come knocking, I want you to be the one who decides if the door opens." I snapped back to the present. The courtroom air was still cold. Arthur Penda was handing the bailiff the communication logs. My mother was sobbing into her tissue. The sound muffled and wet. My father was staring at the table, his face a mask of furious calculation. Tessa was chewing her lip, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. They didn't know about the drive. They didn't know about the conversation in the car. They thought this was about money. They didn't understand that for Silas, and for me, this was about accounting, and the books were finally being balanced. I looked at the folder in the judge's hand. Those weren't just phone logs. They were the receipts of 20 years of neglect. "Ms. Donovan," Judge Holloway said, breaking my reverie. He was looking at me. "The trustee has submitted these logs. Do you have any objection to their admission?" I stood up slowly. I felt Xavier's hand on my back, a warm, steady pressure across the distance. "No, Your Honor," I said clearly. "I have no objection. I believe the truth is in the timeline." The judge opened the file. The flashback was over. The debt was canceled. It was time for collection. Sterling did not sit down. He did not retreat. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals attack the throat. The revelation of the communication logs in the trustee's hand had spooked him, but it had not stopped him. He knew that if he let the narrative rest on the dry mathematical facts of a trust document, he lost, his only path to victory. His only path to that 30% contingency fee was to burn the forest down. He walked away from the defense table and approached the witness stand. Even though nobody was sitting there, he was performing for the gallery. He was performing for the court of public opinion. "Your Honor," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated with righteous indignation. "Mr. Penda wants to show you phone bills. He wants to show you metadata. But phone bills do not tell the story of a dying man trapped in his own home. They do not tell the story of a daughter who systematically dismantled her father's world until he had no choice but to sign whatever she put in front of him." He spun around and pointed a finger at me. It was the second time today. The theatricality of it was exhausting, but effective. "Grace Donovan is not a caretaker," Sterling declared. "She is a jailer." The air in the courtroom shifted. The word jailer hung heavy in the recycled air. Tessa seized the cue. She stood up again. Ignoring the bailiff's earlier warning, her face was flushed, her eyes wide with a desperate intensity. She had abandoned the grieving daughter act. Now she was the crusader. "She changed the locks?" Tessa shouted. Her voice cracked, perfect for the acoustics of the room. 2 weeks after she moved in. My key didn't work. I went over there to bring Dad his favorite soup, and my key wouldn't turn. I knocked for 20 minutes. I knew he was in there. I could hear the television. But she wouldn't open the door. She kept him like a prisoner in his own living room. The gallery murmured. I could feel the eyes on the back of my neck. They were burning. Isolation of the elderly was a primal sin. It triggered a visceral disgust in people. Sterling knew that. Tessa knew that. "Is this true?" Judge Holloway asked. His gaze drilling into me. I remained seated. I kept my face neutral. "I did change the locks, Your Honor, for security reasons." "Security from his own children," Sterling interjected, sneering, "or security from the truth." My mother, Renee, stood up then. She didn't shout. She played the part she had rehearsed in the mirror for 40 years, the martyr. She clutched her handbag to her chest with both hands, her knuckles white. "It was Thanksgiving," Renee said. Her voice was trembling, soft but distinct in the quiet room. "Last Thanksgiving, November 23rd. She looked at the judge, tears streaming down her face. "We all went over there," she continued. "Gordon, Tessa, and me. We brought dinner. We brought gifts. It was a tradition. We just wanted to be a family. We stood on that porch for an hour. It was snowing. It was freezing cold. We rang the bell. We knocked." She let out a sob that sounded like glass breaking. "Grace came to the window," Renee said, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She just looked at us. She looked at her own mother standing in the snow, and she pulled the curtains closed. She didn't open the door. She left us out there in the cold, and she left my husband's father alone inside with her. God only knows what she told him about us. God only knows what lies she fed him to make him hate us." My father, Gordon, nodded vigorously from his seat. "She stole him from us," he growled. "She brainwashed him. That trust isn't his will. It is her greed wrapped in his signature." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. I heard the word shameful whispered from the back row. I heard a tongue click in disapproval. It was a compelling story. It had everything. The cruel, cold-hearted sister. The loving family standing in the snow with a turkey. The dying patriarch locked away in a tower. It was Dickensian. It was tragic. And it was a complete fabrication. Judge Holloway looked at me. His expression had hardened. The technical validity of a trust was one thing. The moral repugnance of elder abuse was another. If he believed I had exerted undue influence through isolation, he could, in theory, find grounds to pierce the trust. Or at least, he could make my life a living hell during the probate process. "Ms. Donovan," the judge said, "you are representing yourself. This is your opportunity to respond to these specific allegations. Did you deny your family access to the decedent on Thanksgiving Day?" I stood up. I did not rush. I smoothed the front of my skirt. I looked at Tessa, who was watching me with a look of triumphant malice. She thought she had me. She thought that because there were 3 of them and 1 of me, their version of history would win by majority vote. "Your Honor," I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice I used when a client called me at 3 in the morning, because their CEO had just been arrested. I did not deny anyone access. My grandfather, Silas Donovan, chose who entered his home. He was lucid, he was mobile, and he was the owner of the property. He was 82, Sterling shouted. He was dependent on you for care if you lock the door. He has no choice. I am not asking for a debate. Mr. Sterling, the judge snapped. He turned back to me. Ms. Donovan, simply stating that he chose is not evidence. You have 3 witnesses testifying under oath that they were physically barred from the residence on a major holiday. Do you have anything other than your word to refute this? This was the moment. The trap had been laid. They had walked onto the X. They had committed to a specific date, November 23rd. They had committed to a specific narrative. We were standing in the snow with dinner. I looked at Arthur Penda. I didn't need to nod. He was already moving. Your Honor, Penda said. His voice cut through the emotional haze like a scalpel. The trustee requests permission to enter Exhibit D into the record. Sterling threw his hands up. More phone bills. Your Honor, we have established that she controlled the phone lines. Phone logs prove nothing if she was the one screening the calls. This is not a phone log, Penda said. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a book. It was not a legal binder. It was not a manila folder. It was a bound leather journal. The leather worn soft and cracked at the spine. It looked old. It looked personal. This, Penda said, holding the book up with 2 hands, is the personal diary of Silas Donovan. He called it the silence log. Tessa stopped crying, her eyes fixed on the book. She didn't recognize it. She had never seen it, because she had never bothered to look at the side table next to his armchair during the rare times she actually visited. Objection. Sterling yelled immediately. Hearsay. The decedent is not here to be cross-examined on the contents of a private diary. Those are private thoughts. They are inadmissible. On the contrary, Penda said, turning to face Sterling. You have just made the decedent's state of mind the central pillar of your argument. You claim he was coerced. You claim he was brainwashed. You claim he was desperate to see his family and was forcibly prevented from doing so. His own contemporaneous written record of his daily life and his feelings toward his family is not only relevant, it is the only evidence that matters. It is highly irregular, Sterling argued, sweat now visible on his upper lip. We don't know when that was written. We don't know if the defendant wrote it herself. The journal has been authenticated by a handwriting expert, Penda said smoothly, and the entries are dated, including an entry for November 23rd. My mother went very still. Judge Holloway looked at the book in Penda's hands. Then he looked at Sterling. Counsel, the judge said, you opened this door. You accused the defendant of isolating the grantor. You accused her of fabricating a reality to manipulate him. If the grantor wrote down his version of reality, I am going to read it. But, Your Honor. Overruled. Holloway barked. Mr. Penda, bring the journal to the bench. Penda walked up the aisle. The sound of his shoes on the wood was the only sound in the room. I sat back down. I glanced at my watch. 10:22. In the row behind me. Xavier was leaning forward. He wasn't looking at the judge. He was looking at me. He saw the slight relaxation in my shoulders. He saw the way I didn't even look at the book. He knew. He realized suddenly that the last 6 months of my life hadn't just been about caregiving. They had been about evidence gathering. He realized that every time I had come home tired and silent, I hadn't just been enduring the abuse, I had been documenting it. Grace Donovan doesn't fight arguments. He probably thought, Grace Donovan fights with archives. The entry for November 23rd, Judge Holloway said, opening the book to the bookmark Penda had placed. Tessa gripped the table. She looked at her mother. Renee looked sick. They were running through their memories, trying to remember if they had actually gone to the house that night, or if they had just told everyone they did. The lie about the snow, the lie about the turkey. It was such an easy lie to tell because who would contradict them? The dead man, the evil sister. They forgot that the dead man could write. Read it into the record. Mr. Penda, the judge said. handing the book back to the trustee. Penda adjusted his glasses. He stood in the center of the room. He didn't look at the book immediately. He looked at my parents. November 23rd, Penda read. His voice was devoid of theatrics, which made the words sound even more devastating. Thanksgiving Day, Penda continued. Tessa closed her eyes. I watched her. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt a cold, hard satisfaction. It was the feeling of a math equation finally resolving to zero. You called me a jailer. I thought, you called me a leech. You told the world I locked him away. But you forgot the one thing I learned at Graywell Risk Bureau. Never go to war with someone who keeps the minutes. Penda cleared his throat to read the handwritten text. The room held its breath. The story of the grieving family standing in the snow was about to collide with the ink of the man they claimed to love. The explosion wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be silent, and it was going to destroy them. Arthur Penda did not simply open the book. He laid it flat on the defense table, pressing the spine down with the palm of his hand as if he were smoothing out a wrinkle in history. Beside the leather-bound journal, he placed a stack of documents that was at least 3 inches thick. In conjunction with the personal diary of the decedent, Penda announced, his voice carrying to the back of the room without the aid of a microphone. I am submitting the certified call records and geolocation data provided by Arbor Cell Communications. These records cover the last 60 months of Silas Donovan's life. They provide a forensic timeline that corroborates every single entry in this journal. He looked up at the judge. The plaintiffs claim they were excluded. The data suggests they were absent. Penda picked up the journal. He handled it with a strange reverence, not because he was emotional, but because he knew he was holding a dead man's heart in his hands. He flipped to the first marked page. Entry dated April 12, 2021. Penda read, Tessa's birthday. I watched my sister. She was staring at the table, her fingernails digging into the wood. April 12th. She knew that date. She knew what she had been doing that day. She had been in Cabo with her friends, posting photos of margaritas on Instagram. Penda continued reading the handwriting of my grandfather. Called Tessa at 9 in the morning. Wanted to sing to her before she started her day. Went to voicemail, left a message, waited by the phone until noon. Called again at 6 in the evening. Voicemail full. She must be having a wonderful time. I hope she is happy. I will wait for her to call back tomorrow. Penda paused. He picked up the Arbor Cell document. He ran his finger down a column of numbers. Cross-reference with carrier data, Penda said, his tone clinical. Outgoing call from the decedent's landline at 9:02 in the morning. Duration, 30 seconds. Outgoing call at 6:15 in the evening. Duration, 12 seconds. Incoming calls from the number registered to Tessa Donovan for the remainder of April 0. Incoming calls for the month of May 0. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a vacuum. Tessa did not look up. She could not look up. To look up would be to face the reality that her loving daughter act had just been dismantled by a cell phone bill from 3 years ago. Entry dated June 19, 2022. Penda continued, turning the page. Father's Day. My father, Gordon, shifted in his seat. He cleared his throat loudly, a nervous tic he had developed whenever a creditor called the house. Gordon promised to come by after his golf tournament, Penda read from the diary. He said he would bring the grandkids. I ordered the barbecue he likes from that place on Main Street. I set the table on the porch, sat out there from 4 o'clock until 8. The brisket got cold. The bugs started biting. I called his cell. No answer. Sent a text. Are you coming, Dad? Penda set the book down and picked up the phone records again. Text message sent at 7:45 in the evening. Penda verified. Status delivered. Status read. Reply none. Gordon stood up. His face was a mottling of red and purple. Now wait a minute, I was busy. That was the year we were restructuring the business. I might have missed a dinner. But that does not prove anything. This is a violation of privacy. You cannot read a man's private disappointments in open court. Sit down. Mr. Donovan, Judge Holloway said. His voice was not loud, but it had the weight of an anvil. You accused this woman of isolating your father. You claimed she kept you away. This diary is evidence of whether you stayed away by force or by choice. The trustee will continue. I object to the tone, Sterling cried out, trying to earn his fee. The trustee is editorializing. The trustee is reading, the judge shot back. Overruled. Penda did not even blink at the interruption. He just turned the page. The entries continue in this pattern for 4 years. Penda summarized, looking at the jury box. Although there was no jury, he was speaking to the record. Whatever the excuse was, work, vacation, headache, traffic, the result was recorded here. And, Your Honor, I would like to draw attention to the handwriting. Penda held the book up for the judge to see. In 2020, the handwriting is firm. It is the script of a strong man. By late 2023, the letters are shaking. The lines are slanted. You can see the physical deterioration of the author. You can see the tremor in his hand as he writes the same sentence over and over again. Penda looked at the page and read the recurring sentence. They are too busy. I am a burden. Grace is the only one who answers. I felt a lump form in my throat. I swallowed it down. I did not cry when I found him dead in his chair. I did not cry at the funeral when my family put on their performance. I would not cry now. Tears were a luxury for people who didn't have to watch their backs. Tessa had stopped crying. The soft, sympathetic weeping she had maintained for the first hour of the hearing had ceased completely. She was sitting statue still. She realized that crying now would look like a confession. It would look like the guilt of a child who realizes the parent knew everything all along. Let us move to the specific allegation regarding Thanksgiving, Penda said. This was it, the pivot point. The plaintiffs claim they came to the house with dinner and gifts and were barred entry by Ms. Donovan, Penda stated. They claim they stood in the snow, heartbroken. He flipped to the bookmark near the end of the journal. The leather cracked audibly. Entry dated November 23, 2025, Thanksgiving. Penda took a breath. For the first time, his robotic demeanor softened just a fraction, as if the words he was about to read were too ugly even for him. They came tonight, Penda read. But they did not bring dinner. Gordon was drunk. I could hear him shouting from the driveway. He drove over the azaleas. Renee was screaming at him. They hammered on the door. They did not ring the bell. They pounded on the wood like they were trying to break it down. The room was so quiet. I could hear the hum of the vending machine in the hallway outside. Gordon shouted that he knew I had money in the safe, Penda read. He shouted that I owed him. He said I was a selfish old bastard who was sitting on a pile of cash while he drowned. Tessa was there. She was crying. But she was yelling too. She yelled that she needed $5,000 for a credit card bill or she would be sued. They didn't ask to come in and eat turkey. They demanded I open the door and write checks. My mother let out a small, strangled noise. She put her hand over her mouth. I was terrified. Penda read, I have never been afraid of my son before. But tonight, I saw the devil in his eyes through the window. Grace locked the deadbolt. She moved the heavy cabinet in front of the door. She sat on the floor with me in the hallway, holding my hand while they kicked the door. I told her not to open it. I told her they would kill me if they got in, just from the stress. Penda looked up. His eyes bored into Gordon Donovan. And then, Penda said, Grace picked up the phone. He picked up the Arbor Cell records one last time. Call log, November 23rd, 8:42 in the evening. Outgoing call from the residence to 911. Duration 12 seconds. Sterling looked like he had been punched in the gut. 911. The call was terminated by the caller, Penda explained. Because, according to the diary, the plaintiff saw Grace on the phone through the window and fled. They got in their car and drove away before the police could be dispatched. Penda closed the book. The sound was like a gavel strike. So, Your Honor, Penda said, his voice returning to its icy calm. The plaintiffs were not locked out of a family gathering. They were locked out of a crime scene they were attempting to create. Ms. Donovan did not isolate the decedent from his loving family. She barricaded him against a home invasion. The narrative collapsed. It didn't just crumble, it vaporized. The image of the poor, excluded children standing in the snow with a turkey vanished, replaced by the image of 3 drunken, desperate people kicking a door and screaming for money, while an 80-year-old man cowered in the hallway. Grace the jailer was gone. Grace the warden was gone. In her place sat Grace the bodyguard. I looked at the judge. Judge Holloway was no longer looking at documents. He was looking at my parents. His expression was one of profound, unadulterated disgust. It was the look a man gives when he realizes he has been asked to facilitate a robbery. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said. His voice was dangerously low. "Did you know about the 911 call?" "No, Your Honor," Sterling whispered. He was distancing himself. He was looking at his clients with the realization that they had lied to him, and in doing so, had led him into a minefield. "My clients, they did not mention that detail," Sterling said. "That is a significant detail to omit," the judge said. Attempting to break down a door is quite different from caroling. Gordon Donovan looked around the room. He saw the way the bailiff was looking at him. He saw the way the court reporter was looking at him. He realized that the story he had told himself, the story that he was the victim, that the world owed him, had just been exposed as a violent delusion. But he couldn't stop. He was a man who had never accepted fault in his life. "She wrote that," Gordon shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the diary. "Grace wrote that she forged his handwriting. My father would never say that about me. I am his son." "The handwriting analysis is certified," Penda said without looking at him. "And the 911 call is recorded on the county server. Would you like me to play the audio? Mr. Donovan, I have it on a flash drive. We can hear your voice through the door. The operator could hear it quite clearly." Gordon opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The bluff was over. The audio existed. If Penda played that tape, Gordon wouldn't just lose the lawsuit. He might face criminal charges for attempted burglary or elder abuse. He slumped back into his seat, defeated by the existence of a digital file he hadn't known was recording. I finally looked at Xavier. He was sitting with his arms crossed, a grim expression on his face. He knew about that night. He had been out of town on a site visit, and I hadn't told him the full extent of it because I didn't want him to worry. I didn't want him to come back and put my father in the hospital. But he knew now. He looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a fierce, protective pride. He nodded once. "You did good." "Grace." I turned back to the judge. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The silence log had done the talking for me. The jailer argument was dead. But Tessa wasn't done. I could see it in her eyes. The desperation was mutating. If she couldn't win on moral grounds, she would try to burn the technical grounds. She would attack the mind of the man who wrote the book. She was going to argue he was crazy. It was the only card they had left, and it was the most dangerous one, because if they could prove Silas was insane when he wrote that diary, then the diary was worthless, and if the diary was worthless, the trust was vulnerable. I watched Tessa lean over to Sterling. She was whispering frantically. She was pointing at the diary and tapping her temple. He was crazy. She was saying, he was paranoid. That's why he wrote that. He was imagining things. I took a deep breath. I checked my watch. 10:35. Bring it on. "Tessa, tell the court he was crazy. Tell the court he didn't know what he was doing. Because Arthur Penda has another envelope, and that one doesn't just have handwriting, it has video." The silence that followed the revelation of the 911 call was not the silence of peace. It was the vacuum left by a bomb blast. My father, Gordon, was slumped in his chair, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. He had been exposed not as a concerned patriarch, but as a drunken aggressor. But a cornered animal is dangerous because it stops thinking about survival and starts thinking about damage. Sterling, the lawyer, was wiping his forehead with a handkerchief that was no longer crisp. He looked at his clients. He saw a sinking ship. He saw his contingency fee dissolving into the ether, but Sterling was a professional brawler. He knew that when you cannot defend the facts, you attack the source. He walked back to the podium. He did not look at the judge. He looked at the floor, gathering his thoughts, constructing a narrative out of the wreckage. "Your Honor," Sterling said. His voice was lower now, stripped of its earlier bombast. It was the voice of a man sharing a sad, uncomfortable truth. "We have heard a lot about diaries and phone calls. We have heard about a frightened old man calling the police." He paused and looked up, fixing his eyes on me. "But we have to ask ourselves, why was he frightened? Why did a man who loved his family for 80 years suddenly view them as monsters? Why did he write paranoid ramblings in a journal?" Sterling turned to the judge. "Paranoia, Your Honor. Delusion. Confusion. These are not signs of clarity. They are symptoms. They are the classic symptoms of advanced dementia." Tessa's head snapped up. She saw the lifeline. It was a cruel, ugly lifeline. But it was the only one left. She had to destroy her father's mind to save her inheritance. "Exactly," Tessa cried out, her voice shrill. "He wasn't in his right mind. That diary proves it. He was imagining things. He thought we were enemies because his brain was failing." Sterling nodded. Seizing the rhythm, "We are moving to invalidate the trust based on lack of testamentary capacity. The grantor did not understand the nature of his act. He was 82 years old. He was on a cocktail of medication for his heart, his blood pressure, and his pain. He was dependent on Ms. Donovan for his food, his schedule, and his reality." Sterling walked toward me. He stopped 3 feet away. "Ms. Donovan is a professional, isn't she?" Sterling asked, dripping with sarcasm. "She works in crisis management. She knows how to shape a narrative. She knows how to guide a client. She moved into that house, and week by week, she whispered poison into a dying man's ear until he didn't know his daughter from a demon. She didn't just isolate his body, Your Honor. She hijacked his mind." It was a powerful argument. It played on the universal fear of aging. It played on the idea that old people are easily manipulated children. Judge Holloway looked at me. "Ms. Donovan, the accusation is specific. Did you direct the decedent to create this trust? Did you suggest the terms? Did you use your professional skills to influence his decision-making?" I stood up. I felt the weight of the accusation. They were trying to turn my competence into a weapon. They were trying to say that because I was good at my job, I must be a manipulator. "Your Honor," I said. My voice was steady. "I am a crisis manager. My job is to assess risk and execute contracts. I do not tell my clients what to think. I facilitate what they want to achieve." I looked at Tessa. She was glaring at me with a mixture of hatred and hope. "I did not tell Silas Donovan to disinherit his family," I continued. "I did not tell him to write that diary. I did not tell him to call the police. I managed his calendar. I drove the car. I ensured his bills were paid. I treated him like a client who needed a firewall, because that is exactly what he asked for. I did not plant the fear in his mind, Your Honor. My family planted it there, year after year, dollar after dollar." "That is a lovely speech," Sterling interrupted. "But it is just her word against common sense. A rational father does not cut off his children unless he is confused or coerced. We need a medical evaluation, since the decedent is gone. We ask the court to presume incapacity based on the erratic behavior described in his own journal." It was a clever trap. The silence log helped me on the isolation claim, but Sterling was trying to use it to prove insanity. My eyes went to Arthur Penda. The trustee was already unzipping a separate compartment of his briefcase. He did not look worried. He looked like a man who had been waiting for this exact specific sentence to be spoken. "Your Honor," Penda said, "the defense anticipates the challenge to capacity in high-value estate planning, particularly when the family dynamic is volatile. It is standard procedure to insulate the instrument against this precise line of attack." Penda pulled out a document bound in blue paper. It looked heavy. "I am submitting into evidence the affidavit of capacity," Penda announced. Sterling scoffed. "A note from his cardiologist that means nothing regarding psychiatric state." "This is not a note from a cardiologist," Penda corrected him, his voice sharpening. This is a forensic capacity evaluation conducted by Dr. Eleanor Vance, a board-certified geriatric psychiatrist, and Dr. Samuel Roth, a forensic psychologist specializing in testamentary competence. Tessa froze. These were not local names. These were heavy hitters. You didn't hire Dr. Vance for a checkup. You hired her when you wanted to bulletproof a will. The evaluation was conducted on the morning of October 14th, Penda stated. The same day the trust was signed. The examination lasted 2 hours. It included the mini mental state examination, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, and a structured clinical interview regarding his assets, his heirs, and his reasoning. Penda handed the blue folder to the bailiff. The findings are unanimous, Penda read from his summary. Silas Donovan scored 29 out of 30 on the cognitive assessment. He was oriented to time, place, and person. He demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of his portfolio, and most importantly, he articulated a clear, consistent, and rational reason for the disposition of his assets. Objection, Sterling yelled. Those doctors were hired guns. They were paid to find him sane. This is a setup. The doctors are officers of the court with unblemished records, the judge warned. Be careful, Mr. Sterling. But we have no way to know what happened in that room, Sterling insisted, desperate to keep the fog of doubt alive. We have a paper report. We don't know if Grace Donovan was in the room signaling him. We don't know if he was coached beforehand. Paperwork can be dry-labbed. Penda paused. He looked at Sterling with something approaching pity. Mr. Sterling, Penda said, you seem to operate under the assumption that Hearthstone Fiduciary is an amateur operation. We do not rely solely on paper. Penda reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small, black USB drive. The entire evaluation was video recorded, Penda said. The color drained from Tessa's face so fast, it looked like a physical reaction to a poison. Video, she whispered. High-definition video and audio, Penda confirmed. Filmed from 2 angles. It shows the entire 2-hour session. It shows that Grace Donovan was not in the room. It shows Silas Donovan sitting in a chair, drinking tea, and explaining exactly why he was doing what he was doing. The judge looked interested. What does he say on the tape, Mr. Penda? Penda looked at his notes. At the 1 hour and 10-minute mark, Dr. Vance asks the decedent why he is excluding his son and his granddaughter from the trust. She asks if he is angry. Penda looked directly at Tessa. Silas answers, I am not angry. Anger is hot. I am just cold. I am tired of being an ATM machine for people who only call me when they are overdrawn. Tessa does not want a grandfather. She wants a line of credit. And Gordon wants a bailout. I am not cutting them off because I am confused. I am cutting them off because for the first time in 10 years, I am seeing clearly. Tessa put her hand over her mouth. She looked like she was going to be sick. She had just stood in open court, under oath, and claimed he was senile. She had claimed he was confused, and now there was a video of him, lucid and articulate, dissecting her greed with the precision of a surgeon. If the court wishes, Penda offered, we can play the relevant clip. No, Tessa shrieked. It was an involuntary reaction. I mean, is that necessary? It is very necessary if you persist in the claim of incapacity, Judge Holloway said. His voice had changed. The patience was gone. He was now looking at a plaintiff who was dangerously close to perjury. Ms. Donovan, Mr. Sterling, you have accused the decedent of being mentally incompetent. The trustee has presented 2 expert affidavits and a video recording that contradicts your claim. If you force the court to watch that video, and it shows a perfectly sane man, I am going to look very closely at the sworn statements you made 10 minutes ago. Sterling looked at the USB drive in Penda's hand as if it were a radioactive isotope. He knew the game was up. You cannot argue against a video of a man explaining his own logic, but Sterling had one move left. It was a dirty move, a desperate move, but he had to try it to save his own skin. He had to prove that the evidence itself was tainted. Who paid for it? Sterling demanded suddenly. The judge blinked. Excuse me. The doctors, Sterling said, pointing at the blue folder. Doctor, Vanson Doctor, Roth, they charge $5,000 a day. Minimum. Who paid them? Did Grace pay them? He spun toward me. That is the key, Your Honor. Grace Donovan hired them. Grace Donovan signed the checks. She bought the results she wanted. This wasn't an independent medical exam. It was a paid performance. She used her own money, or money she stole from him, to build this paper trail. He was trying to paint me as the financier of a conspiracy. He wanted the court to believe I had invested $10,000 to steal $1 million. Did you pay these doctors, Ms. Donovan? The judge asked. Did you retain them? I looked at Sterling. He was sweating profusely now. He was hoping, praying, that he could find a financial link between me and the experts. I did not pay them, I said calmly. Then who did? Sterling sneered. Are we supposed to believe a man who wouldn't pay a phone bill shelled out $10,000 for psychiatrists? I did not pay them, I repeated. I scheduled the appointments. I called the offices. I coordinated the times. That is my job. I am an administrator. So you admit you set it up, Sterling shouted. I admit I made the phone call, I said. But I did not sign the check. Arthur Penda moved his hand to the final document in his stack. It was a single sheet of paper, encased in a plastic sleeve. Your Honor, Penda said, to answer counsel's question regarding the financing of the capacity evaluation. He held up the plastic sleeve. Inside was a canceled check. It was blue, the standard check stock of the Cedar County Credit Union. Check number 409, Penda read. Dated October 1st, paid to the order of Vance Forensic Psychiatry, amount $6,500. Penda walked the check over to the defense table and held it up for Sterling to see. The signature at the bottom is Silas Donovan, Penda said. And in the memo line, written in his own hand, he wrote, For my peace of mind. I watched Sterling stare at the check. The signature was jagged, but it was undeniable. Silas had paid for his own defense. He had used his own money to ensure that his voice would be heard after he was dead. He paid for it himself, Penda said, turning to the judge. He told me that day, Arthur, if I don't pay for this, they will say Grace bought me. I want the receipt to be in my name. The argument of financial manipulation dissolved. I hadn't spent a dime. I hadn't bribed a doctor. I hadn't forced a signature. Silas had purchased his own validity. The capacity argument is baseless, Judge Holloway said. He didn't wait for Sterling to respond. He looked at the clock. The evidence shows the grantor was lucid, represented by counsel, evaluated by experts, and paid for the services independently. The trust stands on a bedrock of granite, Mr. Sterling, and you are trying to chip away at it with a plastic spoon. Tessa slumped forward, her forehead touching the cool wood of the table. She wasn't crying anymore. She was trembling. She realized that the no contest clause was now hovering over her head like a guillotine blade, and the rope was slipping. But there was one layer left, the darkest layer. The layer that had nothing to do with capacity and everything to do with why Silas had needed to protect the money in the first place. My parents were quiet, too quiet. I looked back at them. Gordon was staring at the check in Penda's hand. He wasn't looking at the signature. He was looking at the bank logo. And I realized then that the war wasn't over. Because for Gordon Donovan, this wasn't just about inheritance. It was about survival. He didn't just want the money. He needed the money. And the reason why was about to come out of the shadows. The energy in the courtroom had shifted from the sharp, electric crackle of legal combat to the heavy, suffocating humidity of a swamp. The check for the psychiatrist, signed by Silas Donovan himself, sat on the defense table like a lead weight. Sterling, the shark in the $3,000 suit, had stopped swimming. He sat slumped in his chair, staring at the wood grain. Realizing that his contingency fee had just evaporated into the fluorescent-lit air. But the Donovans were not lawyers. They were desperate people, and desperate people do not stop when they lose on logic. They switch to the only currency they have left: guilt. My father, Gordon, leaned forward. His face was no longer red with anger. It was gray. It was the color of wet ash. He looked at me, not at the judge. For the first time in years, he looked at me as if I were a person, not an obstacle. "Grace," he said. His voice was hoarse, stripping away the bluster to reveal the panic underneath. "Grace, please, look at us." I turned my head slowly. "We are drowning." "Grace," he whispered. The courtroom was so quiet that his whisper carried like a shout. "The house, the mortgage, they are going to take it. We are 3 months behind. If we don't get access to the funds, if we don't get something, we're on the street." My mother, Renee, let out a sound that wasn't a theatrical sob this time. It was a whimper. "We are family. Grace, blood is thicker than money. You can't let your own parents lose everything. Your grandfather wouldn't have wanted that. He was angry, yes, but he wouldn't want us homeless." It was the pivot I had seen them do 1,000 times. When aggression failed, they deployed pity. When the stick broke, they offered the carrot. But the carrot was rotten. I looked at them, and for a second, I felt the old programming kick in. The impulse to fix it, the impulse to write the check, to take the extra shift, to be the good daughter who cleans up the mess. But then I remembered the photos. I remembered scrolling through Instagram 3 months ago. I remembered seeing Tessa in Tulum. I remembered seeing my parents at a resort in Scottsdale, holding cocktails that cost $20 each. I remembered the new lease on Gordon's SUV. "You are broke," I asked quietly. "We are destitute," Gordon insisted, his eyes pleading. "The business, the market turned on us." "You were in Arizona in November," I said. "You stayed at the Four Seasons." Gordon blinked. "That was business, a networking trip." "Tessa just bought a handbag that costs more than my first car," I continued. My voice was flat. I was not accusing. I was just auditing. "It is all on credit," Renee burst out. "Don't you understand? It is all a house of cards. We have to keep up appearances. Grace, if people know we are struggling, the investors pull out, the creditors call. We have been juggling this for years." And there it was. The truth, leaking out like oil from a cracked engine. Beside me, Xavier moved. Throughout this entire ordeal, my husband had been a statue. He was the silent support, the hand on my back. But Xavier was not just a supportive spouse. He was an engineer. He looked for structural failures. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers. He didn't hand them to his lawyer. He didn't hand them to the judge. He slid them across the table to me. "Read the highlighted parts," Xavier whispered. I looked at him. "What is this?" "I ran a background check," he said softly. "Last week, I was afraid they were going to try to pin some of their debt on you as a family obligation if the will went south. I wanted to be ready." I opened the papers. It was a credit report. But it wasn't just a credit report. It was a forensic autopsy of my parents' financial life. I scanned the columns. The numbers were staggering. There were 6-figure liabilities on credit cards I didn't know existed. There were 3 separate refinancings on their house in the last 5 years. The equity was gone. The house was a hollow shell owned by 3 different banks. But then I saw the date on the first major default. It was 10 years ago. I froze. "The surgery," I whispered. For half my life, the narrative had been that my appendix surgery when I was 14 had been the domino that toppled their empire. They had told me, over and over, that the medical bills broke them, that I was the reason they couldn't save. I looked at the numbers on Xavier's report. 10 years ago, the year of my surgery, my father had taken out a business loan for $50,000. 2 weeks later, there was a transaction record for a casino in Atlantic City. A loss, a massive loss. 6 months later, another loan, another loss. The medical bill. It was a drop in the ocean. It was a rounding error. The realization hit me with the force of a physical slap. They hadn't been broke because of me. They had been broke because they were addicts. They were addicted to status, addicted to gambling, addicted to the illusion of wealth. and they had used my scar as their excuse. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. It wasn't the hot anger of betrayal, it was the cold, calculating fury of someone who realizes they have been paying insurance premiums on a house that burned down a decade ago. They lied, I said to Xavier. About everything. Keep reading, Xavier said. Page 3? I turned the page, and that was when the noir element truly entered the room. The story stopped being a family drama and became a crime scene. On page 3, there was a list of inquiries. These were hard pulls on credit reports' attempts to open new lines of credit. There were 5 attempts in the last 2 years, all of them denied. But the name on the application wasn't Gordon Donovan, it was Silas Donovan. My father had been trying to open credit cards in my grandfather's name. I looked up at Arthur Penda. The trustee was watching me read. He knew. Of course he knew. He was the gatekeeper. He had seen the attempts to breach the walls. Penda stood up. He didn't need permission this time. He sensed the shift in the room. He sensed that the curtain had been pulled back. Your Honor, Penda said, since the plaintiffs have raised the issue of financial hardship and family obligation, I believe it is necessary to contextualize their desperation. He opened the silence log again. We have discussed the entries regarding emotional neglect, Penda said, but there is another category of entry in Mr. Donovan's diary. He marked them with a red pen. Gordon went white. He knew what the red pen meant. Entry dated August 4th, 2024. Penda read. Phone rang at dinner. I answered. A man named Mr. Henderson. He said he was from the collection department of Onyx Visa. He asked for Gordon. I told him Gordon does not live here. Mr. Henderson told me that Gordon listed my address as his primary residence. He listed my phone number as his home number. Penda looked up. The decedent was being harassed by creditors looking for his son. That's a mistake, Gordon stammered. A clerical error. I must have auto-filled a form wrong. Penda turned the page. Entry dated September 1st. A letter came. It looked official. I opened it. It was a notice of default on a personal loan. The borrower was listed as Silas Donovan, but the signature was not mine. It looked like mine, but the loop on the S was wrong. It was Gordon's S. The courtroom gasped. This wasn't just debt. This was identity theft. I called Gordon. Penda read from the diary. I asked him if he used my name. He cried. He said he needed bridge financing. He said he would pay it back before I noticed. He said if I reported it, he would go to jail. He begged me. He said, Dad, don't ruin me. It is just paper. Penda closed the book gently. It wasn't just paper to Silas Donovan, Penda said. It was his name. It was his honor, and he realized that his son didn't see him as a father. He saw him as a credit score to be harvested. I looked at Tessa. She wasn't looking at her father. She was staring at the floor, her face a mask of terrified resignation, and suddenly, I understood Tessa's role in this tragedy. She wasn't just a spoiled brat wanting a payout. She was a hostage. Tessa had been raised in this house of cards. She had been given the nice car, the private school, the expensive vacations, all funded by fraud and debt. She had been told that this was her birthright, but she must have known. She must have seen the letters. She must have heard the phone calls. The inheritance wasn't a windfall for her. It was a bail bond. They had promised her that when Silas died, the big money would come. It would pay off the loans. It would pay off the stolen credit cards. It would wipe the slate clean before the law caught up with them. Tessa's frantic crying, her desperation, her vicious attacks on me. It wasn't just greed. It was the panic of a girl who knows that if the check doesn't clear, her parents are going to prison, and maybe she would go with them. You needed the money to cover the fraud, I said aloud. I didn't shout it. I said it to the empty space between our tables. Gordon looked at me. His eyes were dead. He didn't deny it. There was no point in denying it. The diary had the dates. The credit report had the inquiries. The puzzle was complete. We just needed time, Gordon whispered. We were going to pay it back. We always pay it back. No, you don't, I said. You never pay it back. You just find a new person to pay it for you. I looked at Xavier. He squeezed my hand. They didn't come here to mourn, I said to my husband, loud enough for them to hear. They came here to find a rug to sweep the dirt under, and I was supposed to be the rug, again. If I had accepted the family narrative, if I had let them bully me into a settlement, I would have handed them the money. They would have paid off the illegal loans. They would have buried the evidence of the identity theft, and I would have gone back to being the Leech, the daughter who caused all their problems. While they went back to the Four Seasons, Silas knew. That was why he locked the money away. He wasn't punishing them. He was stopping the crime spree. He didn't cut you off to be cruel, I said to my father. He cut you off to stop you from digging the hole any deeper. Sterling was packing his briefcase. He was moving slowly, methodically. He wasn't looking at his clients. He was distancing himself. He knew that the next step in this process wasn't probate court. It was likely a referral to the district attorney's office for fraud. Your Honor, Sterling said quietly, I need to consult with my clients regarding their Fifth Amendment rights before we proceed any further. Judge Holloway nodded. His face was grim. I think that would be very wise. Mr. Sterling. Tessa looked at me. Her eyes were red, rimmed with the exhaustion of a lifetime of pretending. You knew, she whispered. You knew they were fake. I suspected, I said. But I didn't know the cost. What do we do now? She asked. It was the voice of a child asking an adult to fix a broken toy. But I wasn't her parent, and I wasn't her savior anymore. I don't know, Tessa, I said. But for the first time in your life, you are going to have to pay your own bill. Xavier leaned in close to my ear. His breath was warm against the chill of the room. You see, he whispered, you were never the burden. Grace, you were the only asset they couldn't spend. I looked at the watch on my wrist. It was almost 11. The gatekeeper had closed the door on the money, but the door to the truth had just been kicked wide open. And what was standing behind it wasn't a grieving family. It was a Ponzi scheme built on blood, and I had just pulled the final brick out of the wall. Judge Holloway sat back in his high leather chair. The revelations of the credit fraud and the identity theft had sucked the oxygen out of the room, leaving a heavy, toxic silence. But the judge was not a prosecutor. He was a probate judge. His immediate jurisdiction was the trust, not the felonies, though I knew those referrals would be coming later. He looked at Sterling, who was now standing very still, his hands resting on his empty briefcase. Mr. Sterling, the judge said. His voice was no longer inquisitive. It was final. We have established that the decedent was competent. We have established that he was independently represented, and we have established that the allegations of isolation were, to put it mildly, fabricated to cover up a pattern of financial abuse. Sterling nodded slowly. Yes, Your Honor. Which brings us to the mechanism of the trust itself, Holloway continued. He picked up the document Arthur Penda had submitted at the very beginning. Article 9. The No Contest Clause. Tessa made a small, whimpering sound. She knew what was coming. She had gambled that she could blow up the trust before the clause triggered. She had bet on a blitzkrieg. She had failed. The language here is unambiguous, the judge stated, reading from the page. If any beneficiary challenges the validity of this instrument, or challenges the capacity of the grantor, or assists in such a challenge, their interest in the trust is revoked ab initio. From the beginning, they are to be treated as if they had predeceased the grantor. The judge took off his glasses. You filed a motion alleging incapacity. Mr. Sterling, you stood in my court and argued that Silas Donovan was not in his right mind. You put witnesses on the stand, the plaintiffs themselves, who testified to that effect. Your Honor, Sterling said, his voice cracking slightly. We move to withdraw the petition. We move to strike the testimony from the record. My clients were under duress. They were mistaken. We wish to retreat to the original terms of the trust. It was a desperate plea. He was asking for a rewind button. He wanted to go back to 10 o'clock this morning, take the small cash bequest Silas had left them, and walk away. You cannot withdraw, Judge Holloway said coldly. "The bell has been rung. Counsel, you filed the motion. You entered the evidence. You made the accusations under oath. The clause is self-executing. It does not say, if the challenge is successful. It says, if the challenge is made." The judge looked at Tessa. "Ms. Tessa Donovan," he said, "by attacking the capacity of your grandfather, you have triggered the forfeiture provision. You are no longer a beneficiary of this trust. The specific bequest of $50,000 intended for you is void." $50,000. I saw Tessa's face crumple. To a rich person, that was a vacation. To Tessa, right now, that was a lifeline. That was 6 months of minimum payments on the credit card she had maxed out. That was a lawyer's retainer for the criminal defense she was about to need. "No," Tessa whispered. "No, please. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean he was crazy. I wanted to make sure." "You wanted to break the lock," Arthur Penda said from his table. "And the system is designed so that if you try to pick the lock, the contents incinerate." Penda stood up. He wasn't done. The gatekeeper had one more latch to bolt. "Your Honor," Penda said, "while the forfeiture of the bequest is automatic, the trust includes an additional provision in the event of a bad faith challenge. I refer the court to subsection D of Article 9, the indemnity and penalty clause." Sterling looked up, alarmed. "Penalty. The trust stipulates," Penda said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly even, "that if a challenge is brought based on allegations of incapacity that are proven to be false, the challenger is liable for the entirety of the legal fees incurred by the trust to defend itself. Furthermore, the trust instructs the trustee to file a formal motion for sanctions against the plaintiffs for filing a frivolous lawsuit." Penda picked up a piece of paper. "Hearthstone Fiduciary employs top-tier counsel," Penda said. "Our billable hours for the preparation of this defense, the hiring of the expert witnesses, the forensic accounting of the phone records, and the appearance today, currently total $42,000. He looked at Gordon. "The trust will not pay for this defense." Penda said, "You will?" Gordon looked like he was having a stroke. He gripped the edge of the table. "I don't have $40,000. You know I don't. You saw the credit report." "Then we will attach a lien to your remaining assets," Penda said. "Or we will garnish your future wages." But Silas Donovan was very clear. He said, "Why should my estate pay to defend itself against lies? Let the liars pay." It was the ultimate reversal. They had come here to take money. They were leaving not just with zero, but with a debt that would bury them. Sterling looked at the judge. "Your Honor, this is punitive. This is vindictive." "It is contractual," the judge replied. "And given the revelation regarding the identity theft and the fraudulent loans, I am inclined to grant the trustee's motion for fees. You wasted the court's time with a fabricated narrative. Mr. Sterling, someone has to pay for the lights." Then came the twist. Penda wasn't finished. He opened his briefcase one last time. He pulled out a small, sealed envelope. It was not a legal document. It was a letter. "Your Honor," Penda said, "there is one final piece of evidence. This is not for the record of the trial, but for the record of intent. Mr. Donovan gave me this letter on the day he signed the trust. He instructed me to open it only if his family accused Grace Donovan of manipulation." My heart skipped a beat. Silas had written me a letter. "May I read it?" Penda asked. "Proceed," the judge said. Penda broke the seal. He unfolded the paper. "To my family," Penda read, "if you are hearing this, it means you have dragged Grace into court. It means you have accused her of controlling me. It means you have tried to say I am insane." Penda paused. "I am writing this at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. Grace is in the kitchen making tea. She thinks I am sleeping. You will say she made me do this, but you are wrong. I am doing this because I know you. I know that Gordon cannot stop spending. I know that Tessa cannot stop wanting. And I know that Renee cannot stop enabling." Penda looked at Tessa. "I know you will attack Grace," the letter continued, "because she is the only one of you who ever told me the truth. She is the only one who didn't look at me and see a dollar sign. So I have prepared the evidence. I have kept the logs. I have paid the doctors. I have built this trap not to hurt you, but to stop you. I am dead now, so I cannot speak, but I have given the voice to the trustee. Listen to him, and leave Grace alone. She has paid enough." The room was silent. I felt a tear finally slide down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. He had known. He had known exactly what would happen. He had sat in that chair, watching the leaves fall outside the window, and he had scripted this entire morning. He had predicted their greed, their lies, their desperation. He had protected me from beyond the grave. "He knew," Tessa whispered. She was shaking her head. "He knew we would do this. He bet on it," I said softly. Tessa's head snapped toward me. The shock was wearing off, replaced by the ugly, raw panic of a trapped animal. She looked at me sitting there in my simple suit, with my husband beside me. And the trust intact, and she broke. "You think you won," she shrieked. It wasn't a question. It was a scream. "Tessa, stop," Sterling hissed. Trying to grab her arm, she shoved him away. She stood up, knocking her chair over. "You think you are so superior?" she yelled at me. Her face twisted into a mask of pure hate. "You think because you drove him to the doctor and made him tea that you deserve everything? You are a leech. Grace, you have always been a leech. You suck the life out of this family with your gloom and your judgment and your 'I am so perfect' attitude." The judge banged his gavel. "Ms. Donovan, sit down." But she didn't sit. She couldn't sit. The adrenaline of ruin was pumping through her veins. "You manipulated him," she screamed, pointing a finger that was shaking violently. "You played the martyr." "Oh, poor Grace. Look at me. I take care of Grandpa. You did it for the money. You are just as bad as us. You are worse because you pretend you are good." The entire courtroom stared at her. It was ugly. It was the raw, unfiltered sound of entitlement dying. She wasn't a grieving daughter. She was a toddler whose candy had been taken away. Except the candy was $1 million, and the toddler was a 30-year-old woman facing bankruptcy. "You are a parasite," she spat. I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. I walked to the edge of the defense table. I looked her in the eye. "I am not a leech, Tessa," I said. My voice was calm, carrying to every corner of the room. "I am the host, and I am finally evicting you." She gasped. She looked like she wanted to lunge across the aisle and claw my face. My father stood up then. He puffed out his chest, trying to summon the ghost of the authority he used to wield over me when I was a child. He tried to look like the patriarch. "Don't you speak to your sister that way," Gordon growled. "You ungrateful little—" "Sit down, Gordon," I said. I didn't say Dad. I said Gordon. He froze. "Your credit score is 400, I said. "Your house is in foreclosure. You are facing charges for identity theft. You do not have the standing to give me orders anymore. You are not the head of this family. You are a defendant." Gordon's mouth opened, but no words came out. The threat died in his throat. He looked at me and realized that the fear button he had pressed for 20 years was disconnected. He was pressing it, but nothing was happening. I wasn't scared of him. I wasn't indebted to him. I was looking at him like he was a stranger who owed me money, and that terrified him more than the judge. "Mr. Penda," Judge Holloway said, his voice cutting through the tension. "The court accepts the documents. The no contest clause is enforced. The motion for fees is granted. The referral to the district attorney regarding the fraud evidence will be processed by my clerk this afternoon." The judge looked at my family one last time. "This hearing is concluded, and frankly, I have never seen a group of people work so hard to ensure their own destruction." The gavel came down. Bang! It was the sound of a heavy door locking. Arthur Penda closed his briefcase. The click of the latches was distinct. He picked up the diary. He picked up the video drive. He picked up the canceled check. He looked at Gordon and Tessa, who were standing in the wreckage of their lives, stunned and silent. "The gate is closed," Penda said. He didn't smile. He simply stated a fact. This is asset management. It is not a family reunion. He turned to me. For the first time, his eyes softened just a fraction. He nodded. Mrs. Hollis, he said, using my married name. The trust is secure. I will be in touch regarding the distribution schedule. I nodded back. Thank you, Mr. Penda. Tessa slumped into her chair and put her head in her hands. The sobbing started again, but this time, nobody was listening. It was the sound of a reality check bouncing. Gordon looked at the exit, then at me. He looked small. He looked old. He looked like a man who was wondering if I would give him a ride home because his car might be repossessed in the parking lot. But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at my watch. 11:15. The timeline was complete. The contract was executed. I turned to Xavier. Let's go, I said. Is it over? He asked. The play is over, I said. Now they have to pay for the tickets. The gavel had struck the wood, but the echo had not yet faded when Tessa screamed. It was not a scream of grief. It was the sharp, piercing shriek of a person who realizes the parachute has failed to open and decides to grab the person next to them to cushion the fall. It was him, Tessa yelled, spinning around to point a finger directly at the man sitting beside me. It wasn't just Grace. It was Xavier. They planned it together. The room froze. Judge Holloway, who had been in the process of standing up, sat back down heavily, his brow furrowed. The air in the courtroom, which had just begun to clear, thickened instantly with a new, distinct tension. Sit down, Ms. Donovan, the judge warned. The hearing is concluded. It is not concluded, Tessa shouted. She was fumbling with her phone, her hands shaking so badly she dropped it on the table, then scrambled to pick it up. We have proof. We have proof that this was a conspiracy. It wasn't just undue influence, it was fraud. It was insider trading. Sterling looked at his client with horror. He had already lost. He was already facing a motion for sanctions. He wanted to leave, but Tessa was manic. She shoved her phone into his chest. Show him, she hissed. Show him the texts. If we are going down, I am taking them with me. Sterling looked at the screen. He hesitated. I saw a flicker of calculation in his eyes. He was a drowning man, and Tessa had just handed him a piece of driftwood. It was dirty driftwood, but it might float. Your Honor, Sterling said, his voice cautious. My client has just provided me with digital correspondence that suggests an improper relationship between the defendant's husband, Xavier Hollis, and the trustee, Arthur Penda. I felt the blood drain from my face. I wasn't afraid of the law. I knew we had done nothing wrong, but I was afraid of the mud. I worked in crisis management. I knew that once an accusation is made, it lives forever on the internet. Husband of heiress accused of collusion. It didn't matter if it was true. It mattered that it was said. Xavier was a structural engineer. His reputation was built on precision, on honesty. He didn't deserve this. I looked at him. Xavier didn't flinch. He sat with his hands folded, his face unreadable. He looked at Tessa with a calmness that was almost unnerving. What evidence? Judge Holloway asked, his patience hanging by a thread. Text messages, Sterling said, emboldened by the judge's curiosity. He walked the phone up to the bench. Screenshots of a conversation between Mr. Hollis and Mr. Penda, dated October 13th, the day before the trust was signed. The judge took the phone. He squinted at the screen. Read them, Tessa demanded from her table. Her eyes were wild. Read what he said. The judge adjusted his glasses. Sender Xavier Hollis, recipient Arthur Penda. Time 4:30 in the afternoon. Message. Is the package ready? Grace is working on him. He's almost ready to sign. Make sure the fee structure is handled. We split the back end. I gasped. It was a lie. A complete, total fabrication. Xavier had never spoken to Arthur Penda about fees. We didn't even know who Arthur Penda was until the day of the signing. That is a lie, I said. Standing up, My voice shook, not with fear, but with rage. "That is a forgery. Is it?" Tessa sneered. "Or did you two figure out that if you got the old man to lock up the money, you could pay yourselves a management fee forever? You didn't do this for Grandpa. You did it to cut us out and keep the commission." It was a brilliant, sick narrative. It turned my husband, the most honest man I knew, into a co-conspirator. It turned our protection of Silas into a heist. "Mr. Hollis," the judge said, looking past me to Xavier, "did you send this message?" For 2 seconds, the silence was absolute. Then Xavier stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket. He didn't look at Tessa. He looked at the judge. "I did not send that message, Your Honor," Xavier said. His voice was deep, steady, and resonant. "I have never discussed fees with Mr. Penda. However, I must inform the court that the opposing counsel is partially correct about one thing." I looked at him, confused. "What I did communicate with the trustee," Xavier said. "Xavier," I whispered. "I spoke with Mr. Penda on October 10th. Xavier continued, ignoring me, "and I spoke with him again on October 14th, but we did not discuss kicking back fees. We discussed security." "Security?" the judge asked. "Yes," Xavier said, "because Silas Donovan called me." My parents looked up. Gordon's eyes narrowed. "My grandfather called you," Tessa scoffed. "Why would he call you? He barely knew you." "He called me," Xavier said, "because he knew Grace." Xavier reached into his inner jacket pocket. He pulled out his own phone. He didn't ask for permission. He simply tapped the screen and placed it on the defense table, cranking the volume to the maximum. "In the state of Cedar County," Xavier said to the room, citing the legal jurisdiction of our fictional setting, "it is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. Silas asked me to record this. He told me, Xavier, Grace is strong, but she is quiet. She will take the hit. She will let them call her names because she thinks she deserves it. I need a third witness. I need someone who isn't a Donovan." Xavier looked at me. His eyes were soft, apologetic. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you, Grace," he said gently. "He made me promise. He said you would try to stop him if you knew he was worried." He pressed play. The voice of Silas Donovan filled the courtroom. It wasn't the strong voice from the video. It was a late-night voice, raspy, tired, but terrifyingly lucid. "Hello, Xavier. It's Silas." I put a hand over my mouth. Hearing him again, so intimate, so real, was like a physical touch. "I am going to sign the papers on Tuesday." The recording continued. "Arthur is bringing them, but I am scared. Son, I am scared of what comes after." On the recording, Xavier's voice answered, "We will protect you. Silas, Grace is there." "I know," Silas said. "That is why I am worried. Grace is a shield. She absorbs the blow. She has been absorbing their blows since she was 14. When I die, they are going to attack her. They are going to say she stole it. They are going to say she tricked me." There was a pause on the tape, a sound of heavy breathing. "They will invent things." "Xavier," Silas said. "Tessa has an imagination when she is cornered. She will say anything. She will fabricate things. If she does, if she tries to drag Grace into the mud, I need you to be the one who stands up. Grace won't fight dirty. You have to?" "I will," Xavier's voice said on the tape. "Good," Silas whispered. "Arthur Penda is a good man. I told him to trust you. Talk to him. Make sure the perimeter is secure. Don't let them win. Xavier, don't let them turn my legacy into their bail money." The recording ended with a soft click. Xavier looked at the judge. "I spoke to Mr. Penda to confirm the security protocols for the house," Xavier said. "I spoke to him to ensure that when the time came, the evidence we presented today would be ready. I was not plotting a theft, Your Honor. I was coordinating a defense." The room was silent. Tessa's face was pale, but her eyes were still hard. She was clinging to her lie because it was the only raft she had left. "That proves nothing," Tessa shrieked. That just proves they were talking. The text message is real. I have the screenshot. He admitted he talked to Penda. That proves the opportunity. She was flailing. She was trying to twist the truth to fit her forgery. Arthur Penda stood up. He didn't look at the judge. He looked at Tessa. He looked at her with the expression of a technician examining a broken machine that needed to be scrapped. Ms. Donovan, Penda said, you have submitted a screenshot, a digital image. Yes, Tessa cried. From an anonymous source. Someone who knew the truth. I am the trustee of Hearthstone, Penda said. My work phone is issued by the firm. It is an encrypted device. Every message sent or received is logged on a secure server in real time. It is impossible to delete them. It is impossible to alter them. Penda picked up his laptop. He turned it around so the judge could see the screen. This is the server log for October 13th, Penda said. There are 0 messages from Xavier Hollis. There are 0 messages to Xavier Hollis. He pointed to a specific line of code on the screen. However, Penda said, I can analyze the metadata of the image you just provided to your counsel. Mr. Sterling, if you would be so kind as to airdrop that file to me. Sterling didn't move. He knew. He looked at the phone in his hand like it was a grenade. Mr. Sterling, the judge barked. Transfer the file. Now. Sterling tapped the screen with a trembling finger. A moment later, a ping sounded on Penda's laptop. Penda typed for 3 seconds. Then he stopped. Your Honor, Penda said, the metadata of this image file indicates it was created yesterday at 8:45 in the evening. He looked at Tessa. The software used was Adobe Photoshop. Penda read, the device used to edit the image was an iPhone 15 Pro, registered to Tessa Donovan. The air left the room. It wasn't just a lie. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a crime, a deliberate, clumsy, desperate crime committed the night before the trial. Tessa had sat in her hotel room, realizing she was going to lose, and she had spent the evening manufacturing evidence to frame my husband. Tessa started. Her voice was tiny. I didn't someone sent it to me, I just saved it. The metadata shows the editing history, Penda said ruthlessly. It shows the layers. It shows the text box being added. It shows the timestamp being typed in manually. Judge Holloway stood up. He did not look tired anymore. He looked furious. Ms. Donovan, the judge said. His voice was a low rumble of thunder. You have come into my courtroom. You have accused a dead man of insanity. You have accused a sister of abuse, and now you have attempted to frame a man for fraud using forged evidence created on your own device. Your Honor, Sterling tried to interject. Sit down, Mr. Sterling, the judge roared. Unless you want to be joined in the referral to the Bar Association, you will sit down and be silent. Sterling collapsed into his chair. The judge leaned over the bench, glaring down at Tessa. Fabrication of evidence is a felony, the judge stated. Perjury is a felony. You have not just lost your inheritance today, young lady. You have very likely lost your freedom. Tessa looked at me. For the first time, I saw the bottom of her soul. There was no grief there. There was no regret. There was only a burning, consuming need to win. She would have sent Xavier to prison to get that money. She would have destroyed my marriage, my reputation, and my life just to pay off the debts she had accrued buying handbags and vacations. She wasn't a victim of my parents. She was the final evolution of them. Gordon and Renee were sloppy grifters. Tessa was a predator. Grace, the sister, died in that moment. I looked at her, and I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just the cold clarity of a contract being terminated. You tried to frame Xavier, I said. My voice was quiet, but in the silence of the room, it hit her like a slap. I had to, she sobbed, the tears finally real because they were for herself. I have nothing. They are going to take my car. They are going to evict me. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to get a job, Xavier said. He said it simply, without malice. He said it like the engineer he was. identifying the structural flaw in her life. "Your Honor," Penda said, closing his laptop, "I believe the trust's position is vindicated. The defense rests." "The defense rests," the judge agreed. "And the plaintiff is in serious trouble." Holloway looked at the bailiff. "Take custody of the plaintiff's phone," the judge ordered. "And take custody of the device provided by Mr. Sterling. They are now evidence in a criminal investigation regarding the fabrication of legal exhibits," Tessa screamed as the bailiff approached her. "No, you can't take it. That's my private property." "It is the instrument of a crime," the bailiff said, taking the phone from her hand. Gordon and Renee stood paralyzed. They watched their golden child, their investment, their retirement plan, being stripped of her phone and read her rights regarding the evidence. They didn't move to help her. They didn't step between her and the bailiff. They were calculating. They were wondering if the blowback would hit them. They were wondering if they could distance themselves from her forgery, just like they had tried to distance themselves from their debts. "I watched them. You are alone. Tessa, I thought, you fought for them. You lied for them. You forged for them. And now that you are burning, they are taking a step back to avoid the heat." Xavier put his hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" he whispered. I looked at the husband who had secretly recorded a dying man to save me. I looked at the man who had stood up and taken a bullet meant for his reputation, just to expose the shooter. "I am better than okay," I said. I looked at the judge. "Your Honor," I said. "May we go? I have a funeral to plan, a real one, for the sister I thought I had." The judge nodded. "You are dismissed. Mrs. Hollis, the court apologizes for the conduct of the plaintiffs." I turned around. I gathered my purse. I didn't look at Tessa. I didn't look at Gordon. I didn't look at Renee. I walked past them. Tessa was sobbing, begging Sterling to fix it. Gordon was staring at the floor. Renee was looking at me with wide, terrified eyes, perhaps realizing that the Bank of Grace was closed forever. I walked toward the heavy wooden doors. Xavier walked beside me. Arthur Penda walked behind us, the gatekeeper ensuring we made it out safely. The ambush had failed. The trap had sprung, and the only things caught in it were the wolves. Judge Holloway did not slam the gavel down immediately. He let the silence hang in the room. Heavy and suffocating, it was the kind of silence that usually happens at a funeral. But we were not mourning a person today. We were mourning the death of my family's audacity. The judge looked at the bailiff who was holding Tessa's phone, the digital smoking gun that had just blown her life apart. Then he looked at the defense table. He looked at Arthur Penda, the man in the gray suit who had dismantled a lifetime of lies with a briefcase full of paper. And finally, he looked at me. "Stand up," the judge said. We all stood. My legs felt light, not with relief, but with the strange, floating sensation of a diver who has surfaced too quickly. "This court finds the petition for emergency conservatorship to be without merit," Judge Holloway ruled. His voice was a monotone of absolute authority. "The court further finds that the irrevocable trust established by Silas Donovan on October 14th, 2023 is valid, binding, and enforceable. The allegations of incapacity are dismissed with prejudice. The allegations of undue influence are dismissed with prejudice." He turned his eyes to the plaintiff's table. Tessa was trembling so hard her chair was vibrating against the floor. Sterling was staring at his shoes, wishing he could dissolve into the floorboards. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the court invokes Article 9 of the trust instrument. By filing this motion, and by asserting under oath that the grantor was incompetent, Tessa Donovan has triggered the no contest clause. She is hereby disinherited from the trust entirely. The specific bequest of $50,000 is forfeited and returned to the principal." Tessa let out a choked sob. $50,000. It was gone. It was just a number on a page now. A ghost of a chance she had murdered with her own greed. "Regarding the motion for sanctions," Holloway said, his eyes narrowing, "given the introduction of forged evidence and the clear intent to defraud the court, I am granting the trustee's motion for legal fees. The estate of Silas Donovan will not bear the cost of this circus. The plaintiffs Tessa Donovan, Gordon Donovan, and Renee Donovan are jointly and severally liable for the legal costs incurred by the trust. Gordon's head snapped up. Me. But I didn't file the motion. It was Tessa. You were a co-signatory on the supporting affidavits, the judge snapped. And you sat in this courtroom and corroborated a false narrative about isolation while knowing full well you were committing identity theft against the deceased. You are all on the hook. The trustee has submitted a bill for $42,000. You have 30 days to pay. $42,000. I watched my father's face. I watched the math happen behind his eyes. He didn't have $42,000. He didn't have $4,000. He had credit card debt, a foreclosed house, and a leased SUV he couldn't fuel. Finally, the judge said, picking up a separate file, I am referring the matter of the forged text messages and the fraudulent loan applications to the district attorney's office for criminal review. Mr. Sterling, you will surrender all files related to this case to the prosecutor by 5 o'clock today. Is that understood? Yes, Your Honor, Sterling whispered. Case closed, Holloway said. The gavel fell. Bang! It sounded like a gunshot ending a suffering animal's misery. Arthur Penda began to pack his briefcase. He moved with the same slow, deliberate rhythm he had maintained all morning. He didn't look triumphant. He looked efficient. Mrs. Hollis, Penda said to me, a moment, before you leave. I turned to him. Yes, Mr. Penda. There is one final administrative detail regarding the distribution, he said. He opened a folder I hadn't seen before. The trust is now locked. The assets are secured. Your family cannot touch a dime. However, Silas included a secondary directive. My parents were lingering by the exit, terrified to leave the room and face the reality waiting for them in the hallway. They were listening. They were hoping for a crumb. Maybe there was a loophole. Maybe there was a payout. Silas was very concerned about legacy, Penda said, his voice carrying clearly to the back of the room. He knew that if he left the money to his son, it would go to casinos. If he left it to his granddaughter, it would go to department stores. So, he structured the bulk of the liquid assets, approximately $1.2 million, into a charitable subtrust. I saw Gordon's eyes widen. $1.2 million. He looked like he was going to faint. The Donovan Fund, Penda explained, is dedicated to providing hospice care for low-income seniors in Cedar County. It pays for the very things Silas feared losing: dignity, comfort, and safety. Penda looked at me. And he named a sole administrator for the fund, Penda said. You, Grace, you have the checkbook. You decide which facilities get the grants. You decide who gets help. I felt tears prick my eyes again. He hadn't just given me the money. He had given me the work. He had given me the power to be the caretaker for people who actually appreciated it. He trusted you to be the gatekeeper, Penda said. Not just of his money, but of his kindness. I nodded. I will do it. I know you will, Penda said. He snapped his briefcase shut. I will be in touch tomorrow to initiate the transfer. Good day, Mrs. Hollis. Penda walked past my parents without glancing at them. He was a shark who had finished feeding. Xavier took my hand. Ready. Ready, I said. We walked down the center aisle. The wooden benches seemed to stretch for miles. My family was standing near the double doors, huddled together like survivors of a shipwreck. As we approached, my mother, Renee, stepped forward. Her mascara was running. Her face was a ruin of panic and cosmetic maintenance. Grace, she said. Her voice was a wobbly whine. Grace, wait. I stopped. I didn't look at her with warmth. I looked at her with the polite detachment of a stranger waiting for a traffic light to change. What do you want? Renee? I asked. Don't call me that. She sniffed. I am your mother, Grace. You heard the judge. $40,000. We can't pay that. They will put a lien on the house. They will take everything. They are already taking the house. Mom, I said, I saw the credit report. You lost the house 2 years ago. You are just squatting in it. Gordon stepped in. He tried to summon his old bluster, but it was hollow. Grace, look, we made mistakes. Okay, we are human, but this is too far. You have control of the fund now. $1 million. You can write it off. You can fix this sanctions thing. Just tell the trustee to drop the debt. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, I said. It was a crime. We are family, Gordon hissed, clutching my arm. You can't let them ruin us. Think about the embarrassment. Think about the neighbors. Just cut us a check from the fund. Call it a consulting fee or a grant. No one has to know. I looked at his hand on my sleeve. I remembered all the times that hand had pointed at me in accusation. I remembered the times he had told me I was a burden. I remembered the hospital bill. A grant? I repeated. Yes, Gordon said, his eyes lighting up. For hardship. We are in hardship. Grace, we qualify. I laughed. It was a short, dry sound. The fund is for people who need hospice care. Gordon, I said, are you dying? I might be, he said desperately. The stress is killing me. Then go to the doctor, I said. But pay for it yourself. I pulled my arm away. You know, I said, looking at both of them. I remember when I was 14, I remember sitting at the kitchen table with that hospital bill. I was crying because I thought I had ruined us. And you told me something. Dad, do you remember what you said? Gordon stared at me. Blankly. You said, sorry doesn't put money in the bank, I quoted. You said, you are a cost center. Grace, you have to pay your own way. I stepped closer to him. Well, now the bill has come due, I said softly. And I am not your bank anymore. I am the auditor. I turned to the door. Tessa lunged. She had been standing against the wall, silent. But the finality of my rejection snapped something in her. She didn't want to beg anymore. She wanted to hurt. She wanted to make me feel the physical pain of her financial death. She grabbed my shoulder, her fingernails digging into the fabric of my jacket. You bitch, she screamed. You planned this. You stole my life. She raised her other hand to strike me. I didn't flinch. I didn't cower. I didn't do what the old Grace would have done, which was to apologize and take the hit. I stepped back, broke her grip with a sharp, practiced movement I had learned from a security consultant at my firm, and looked her dead in the eye. Touch me again, I said. My voice was low, dangerous, and completely steady. Touch me one more time, Tessa, and I will call the police right now. The bailiff is 10 feet away. Do you want to add assault to the list of felonies you are facing today? Do you want to spend tonight in a cell instead of a hotel? Tessa froze. Her hand hovered in the air. She looked at the bailiff, who was already reaching for his radio. She looked at the empty courtroom. She looked at the ruin of her future. She dropped her hand. I hate you, she whispered. I know, I said, but that doesn't pay the rent either. I pushed the heavy wooden doors open. The sunlight outside was blinding. It hit us like a physical wave, warm and clean. The air smelled of rain and asphalt, not recycled lies and legal fear. We walked to the parking lot. My car, a sensible sedan, fully paid for, was waiting. Xavier walked around to the passenger side. He didn't just unlock the door. He opened it for me. He stood there, holding the handle, looking at me with a smile that reached his eyes. You okay? He asked. I feel. I paused, searching for the word. I feel light. That's because you just dropped 200 pounds of dead weight. Xavier said. I got into the car. He closed the door. The sound was solid, secure, a steel barrier between me and the world I had just left behind. As Xavier drove us out of the courthouse lot, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Arthur Penda. Transfer initiated. The fund is active. Also, I have just received confirmation from the court clerk. The lien has been filed against your father's remaining equity. The bankruptcy proceedings for your sister will likely begin by Friday. I looked out the window. I saw my parents and Tessa standing on the sidewalk. They were arguing. Gordon was shouting at Tessa. Renee was crying. Tessa was screaming back at them. They were eating each other alive. It was a tragedy, but it wasn't my tragedy. I pulled up my contacts list. I scrolled down to Dad, delete contact. I scrolled down to Mom, delete contact. I scrolled down to Tessa, delete contact. I didn't block them. Blocking them implies that you are afraid they will call. Blocking them acknowledges that they exist. I just erased them, if they called. The number would show up as unknown, and I never answer unknown numbers. Xavier, I said, putting the phone down. Let's go get some lunch. I'm paying. Xavier laughed. Technically, the trust is paying. No, I said, looking at the road ahead, stretching out straight and clear. Silas is paying, and I think he would want us to order the expensive wine. The gate was closed. The key was in my pocket, and for the first time in my life, the house was quiet. Thank you so much for listening to this story on Juliet Revenge Stories. We would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening from a quiet room like Grace, or are you on the go? Please leave a comment below with your location and your thoughts on Grace's final decision. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that hype button so we can bring you more stories of justice served cold.